My name is Malay. I am the founder of Ayuda, which is a product management training company. And also I work as a director of product at Vyapar, which is India's second largest billing and accounting software. I run, of course, a program that helps folks get better at product management and hopefully break into it as well if they're not already into it. And also I build real world products that are fortunately used by over a millions of users. Right, but that's just about me. But we'll now move into what we're all about today, which is the agenda. Right. So we're going to focus very quickly in this, and it's going to be very power packed. I just need 1 hour of your time. What we're going to do is we're going to first begin with the understanding of what a hiring manager really wants out of an APM, a PM, and an SPM role. So to give you a very good clarity of this is exactly what a hiring manager wants, and to give you that understanding, that's where we'll begin. Then I'm going to make you go through a great PM CV. I'm going to give you a structure of it and also show you my CV, which is built according to it. Now, this is, of course, the base CV. So I'm going to give you the understanding of what a base CV is going to look like. Then we are going to understand how you can improve your CV as a product manager. We're going to look at it from two perspectives. One is when you have some experience, and the other is when you're just without any experience. With that, we will get started now. And the first thing that we'll talk about, as you can see, is to understand what a recruiter's perspective is around a CV. Right. So to help you understand this, right, let's assume that you are a recruiter who's looking at someone who is coming into a PM role. Now, the first thing that you feel, especially for product management roles, is that people may be looking at, hey, is this person smart, right? But that's actually not true. What typically recruiters are looking at, and this includes hiring managers, and because hiring managers typically give the requirements to talent acquisition folks as well, the typical requirement or the typical description of the role is that, hey, can this person operate at certain specific things that I want them to operate at? Right. Which is why, you may have a CV that can get rejected for an SPM role, but the same CV might work for an APM role. Right. Let's try and break it down. So the first thing that we'll talk about is an associate product manager role. Now, for those of you who don't know, associate PM role is a starting role in product management. Typically, when either you're coming out of college or you are, very fresh in terms of your experience, you go into an APM role. Now, one big misconception that a lot of people have is that they feel that because they have zero experience in PM, they will have to start with APM roles. So I keep getting a lot of folks with 8 years of experience, 10 years of experience, who feel that, hey, because we don't have any experience in PM, we will have to start at an APM level, and hence we'll have to start at very low salaries and so on and so forth. But that's absolutely not true, right? Why? Because think of it like this, right? If you are running, let's assume that you are leading a product team, or you are looking at a product team, or you are a founder or something like that. Now, if your team is well flourishing, right? If you've got like some people who are at an APM level, some people who are at a PM level, SPM level, getting someone with, let's say, 8 to 10 years of experience at a very starting point does not make really any sense, right? Because it would make the dynamics of the team very difficult to manage. It will make it very difficult for people to understand what's going on, and so on and so forth, which is why very, very rarely will you see very senior folks get into entry level roles. I'll talk about what is the right way for you to target when I talk about how do you change your CV with experience, some senior roles and move into them. But first, APM roles are roles which are typically from a perspective of folks who are moving into product. And there are three major things that a recruiter or a hiring manager looks at when they look at APM role. Now, when I say three major things, what I mean by that is that, can your CV give a demonstrated example, which is a real world demonstrated clear-cut example of the fact that you can do three things, right? Now, once again, I'm saying not any gyan, not any fluffy statements here. Actual examples of places where you have thought like a PM, which means that you've done problem identification, user thinking, problem structuring, decision making, right? Those kind of things, right? So if you're, let's say, from an engineering background or an analytics background or a consulting background, those kind of, or even from college, what they would look at when you're targeting an APM role is projects, experiments, and features where you have done four things. One is spotted a problem, proposed a solution, worked with a team, and actually shipped something live or made something live that was used by a certain number of users, right? So for example, to give you an example of what, let's take an example of Swiggy, right? So a Swiggy APM candidate should be someone who has ran an experiment to, let's say, analyze restaurants menu quality, right? Or a Misho candidate who's very fit for the role, for an APM role, would probably have something where they have worked on onboarding flows for a very similar user, like the um, like a typical seller on Misho, right? Or someone who is trying to look at an APM role at Razorpay might have worked on a problem in an onboarding flow and worked on the KYC of it, right? Now, very, very clearly at this stage, scale is not a problem. Thinking is what people are looking at. Now, most webinar sessions that I see and I feel, they optimize for this role only, which is why you see a lot of people telling you uh, to make tear downs. Right now, at an APM level, to showcase this, the fact that you can identify a problem, showcase a user thinking, structure it, take some decisions, a tear down is good enough, right? You can go through a Swiggy's entire flow and suggest some improvements based on that, right? But as you go higher up the order, this won't work. We'll talk about how we will change it in a bit. But let's move to the second part of what is required after an APM, which is, can you work as a team, right? So they want to see collaboration. They want to understand, have you had some chance to work with engineers, designers, ops, sales, clients, or even have you shown like leadership at a college level, hackathons? All of those count in this case, right? They just want to make sure that they are not hiring someone who needs to be taught the basics. And this is why a lot of companies, when they list down requirements for APM roles, they even say, I want 1 year of experience, 2 years of experience, 3 years. And so many people get worried about that because, why would they want so much years of experience for an associate level? The situation is that because they want you to be able to work with teams, the best filter, if there is nothing else, is the fact that you've actually worked for a couple of years professionally. If you've worked for a couple of years professionally, it's pretty sure, or you can say with a lot of certainty, that you would have worked with a set of engineers or maybe designers, etc., which is why so many people look at it. But if your CV clearly demonstrates the fact that you have worked with engineers, designers, sales, operations, B2B clients, if the role is like that, if your CV is able to clearly demarcate and showcase that, then that whole situation of X number of years of experience actually goes away, right? So that is the second thing that they would look at an APM level. The final thing that they look at is ownership, right? So APMs, you have to understand, are hired for potential. So when I hire, or other folks at leadership roles at PMs, in PM hire, they typically hire APMs for potential, which means that when you discuss with them, when they see your CV or the brief that they give to hiring managers, they look for side projects, they look for leadership, they look for some small tweaks, some mini startups, some internal automations and process improvements. Now, once again, these are the basics that really work really well at an APM role, which is why you see so many people suggesting to make NA10 automations or AI automations. They work really, really well, but only when you're entering, because this is a place where just some basic understanding of ownership is fine. Right? So if you're targeting an APM role, three things: can you think like a PM? Can you work with teams? Can you show ownership? Right? So now quickly just drop a yes in the middle if you've understood whatever I've said so far, if the pace is fine and everything is good. All right, perfect. There's a question on recording, so I just covered it already. Recordings are going to be there. Don't worry about it. Okay, got it. Very nice. Now, let's move on to the next role, which is a PM. Now, this is actually where things start changing, right? Because so far at an APM role, what happens is there is no way in which you can actually demarcate someone, which is why you look at these things. But for PMs, what happens is that the expectation is that this person is not someone who I'm going to groom. I am bringing this person to hit the ground running, which means that PM experience. Now, when I say PM experience, I don't literally mean the designation PM experience, but things like this, which you see on your screen, become very important. The first and foremost is, have you owned a metric? Now, what does it mean? Now, why have I written it like this is because you should not think of this as a PM only situation, right? Because if you think like that, then the journey of making the transition ends there, right? What you should instead think about it is that, okay, what can I figure out from my set of things based on which I can convince the person in front of me that I have owned a product metric. Now, this metric could be revenue, conversion, retention, cost, growth, engagement, anything, even cost, right? If you've owned that, that is also fine, right? For example, when someone, let's say at a Paytm or a Freshworks or all of these companies, when they take interviews for PMs, the expectation is to say that I owned X, which means I owned, let's say, revenue, additional revenue at Freshworks, or I owned movie bookings at whatever, and it moved by Y, right? So basically, you have to understand that the first thing that they look for when they look for PM roles is the fact that, do you have situations in your CV, enough situations in your CV rather, where you have owned X and it moved the metric by Y? If your resume only says about what you did and the things that we saw earlier, which is, have you shown ownership and you've done some projects and you've done collaboration and all of that, there is where the PM lens is very difficult to look at, because then they may not be able to hire you to hit the ground running, right? The second thing for a PM is, can you handle real complexity, right? So they want to see multiple teams having to make really difficult decisions, taken some trade-offs, looked at some conflicting priorities, managed multiple stakeholders, and so on. So it's very similar to the APM role when you say, can you work with teams? But here the idea is with more complex situations, right? So have you worked with engineering? Have you worked with design, business, operations, product, sales, marketing, support? And have you had situations of conflicting priority? This is why in behavioral questions, for especially more senior roles, you see the questions of, tell me a time when you have disagreed with someone. Tell me a time when you had to convince someone about something that they didn't believe in, and so on and so forth, right? So since a PM is expected to like land right into the middle of all this chaos and do well at it, it's basically, it should be very, very clearly reflected in your CV, the fact that you've handled certain complex projects. Right now, this is a slightly tricky part, because when I say complex project, you cannot be too complex in your CV, because then they might not understand what you're talking about, but they should still get a sense. So a great way to do it is to show scale. A great way to do it is to show multiple stakeholders getting involved and getting through it, and so on and so forth. We'll talk about that as well in a bit. And the last part is, have you shipped something meaningful? Which means that, have you had real users, real features, not just small experiments or projects that would be there? Have you had real improvements that you have done? So have you changed, let's say, churn? Have you improved some internal efficiency, right? Have you improved certain failures, maybe in, and not necessarily only in product, but necessarily internally as well, right? Have you spotted a problem with, let's say, failures happening somewhere and worked on it, and so on and so forth? Hiring managers and recruiters as a proxy, they essentially want proof that you can be trusted with a real product, and the best proof of it is to show that you've done it in the past, right? Finally, the senior role. Now, I've not gone beyond the senior PM role, and you can use that for PPM as well, because I think beyond senior PM role, it becomes into people management and all of those things. So we'll not, sorry, cover that today, but we'll look at SPM roles. And this is where, you are not judged on features also right now, right? So to break it down, APM, can you think like a PM, work with teams, show ownership? PM, owning metrics, handling complexity and shipping something real. SPM is when large scale ownership comes into picture. Now once again, it does not mean that you need to be a product manager to do it, even at an SPM role. I'll talk about how your CV can change in a bit, like I said. But have you done business ownership in the past is how people evaluate senior product managers. So large user bases, a large scale of revenue, maybe international expansion or international impact, or even big teams in general, right? So essentially, things like, were you responsible for the entire retention of the product? Were you responsible for entire India business coming in from the product, right? Were you responsible for the entire platform that was running something, right? So the first thing that they look for SPM roles is, do you operate at scale? This is why in your CV, things like the ARR or the annual revenue rate or the monthly revenue rate becomes important. This is why large, bigger numbers of $8 million, $10 million, those kind of things become important, and that's what is expected out of an SPM CV. The second thing, and this is something that most people, I don't think falter at, but have a challenge at, which is, have you ever thought strategically? Right? Which means, have you, and the best part and the best kind of question that you will say, and a lot of people ask that, is, have you ever sunset a feature? Which means, have you ever killed a feature after releasing it? Because if someone is able to answer that well, that means that they have a very strategic brain and they can think very strategically, right? So the SPM is expected to know that they've taken decisions on what to build, what to not build, when to kill features, when to prioritize, when to not prioritize. And they want to see roadmap level ownership. They want to see business trade-offs that you've taken, long-term thinking in this, right? If you only think of just projects that you've done, or just features that you've done at an SPM level, it's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to build from there, right? Finally, the last part of an SPM is, can you lead without authority, right? Which means, because a PM role is a role where you wouldn't have people reporting into you, right? You work with teams, you decide what a bunch of people are going to work on, but they still don't report to you, right? Which means that, are there signs of you having aligned multiple teams together, you having changed the direction of the team entirely, you having fixed something that was broken, or you had led some turnarounds, and so on and so forth, right? Especially in a lot of Indian startups, top startups, a question that's very frequently asked is situations where you've turned around something that was not going well, right? Or when things did not go well, there was a bad launch and things failed, how have you went ahead and turned it around, right? So that is how someone who's looking at a recruiter's perspective of this, looking at it, right? So once again, APM, very basic. Can you think like a PM? Can you work with teams? Can you show ownership? PM, can you own some metric? Can you handle complex situations and product features? And have you shipped something real in the past? And then SPM, of course, have you had scale? Do you think strategically? And can you lead without authority? Are the things that people optimize for, right? Now, just let me know if you're getting this. Any questions that you're having, just drop it into the Q&A section. Someone is saying there's a network lag issue. I hope that's not the case. I could see a lot of people saying yes. Cool. Just let me know if so far so good. If you have any questions, just drop it into the Q&A so that I can answer them towards the end of the session. Okay, a couple of people are saying that there is a network lag. Okay, most people are saying that it is okay. Okay, perfect. I hope it's good for everyone. If not, just we can check the network. It might be an issue. Okay, perfect. Right. Now let's move on to the next part of what we'll talk about. And the next part we'll talk about is what makes a great PM CV. Right. So we've understood what a recruiter looks like, right? We've understood that you need a very good CV to convince people of certain things. And the first thing that your interviewers are going to see is your resume, right? And you've got to make sure that it's perfect, right? You have to do everything to make sure that it's absolutely perfect, right? And what we're going to talk about is the four things that are important for a resume to be there. We're going to talk about, I'm going to show you a format that I previously shared on my LinkedIn and everywhere, but I'm going to show you that and try and help you understand how that works. And, we'll take it from there. So there are 4 points that you have to understand. The first is formatted cleanly. Now, this is a non-negotiable, which essentially means that the format in which your CV is created should be absolutely clean and crisp and clear. Right now, there is, of course, a concept of ATS, which is to automatically, the ATS is basically all the hiring managers or TA people, they use an automatic tracking system for applications. And that gives us score sometimes for CVs there, which is why it's important to have it in a very clear format. But now ATSs are so good that they pick up most of the CVs there. But the biggest thing that you have to understand is that it has to be formatted extremely cleanly, right? Which means that, no random blank spaces, no random inconsistencies of more space somewhere, less space somewhere, no situations of misalignment of something indented a little to the right, little to the left. Every single pixel on your CV should be absolutely perfect, right? Now, this is the only chance that you're going to get to present and to, um, be able to talk to someone that is the recruiter. I mean, via the CV talk to someone is what I meant. So it has to be absolutely pixel perfect, right? There is no room for you to make a mistake on that. So now the best way is to take a PDF of it, upload it to ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT to give you every single grammatical error, ask ChatGPT to figure out if there was an indentation mistake. Now what happens is, the PDF that you give, because GPT is trained to go through the PDF, it will not be able to give you indentation problems. So what you can do is you can take a screenshot of the CV and upload the image, so that image wise it can figure out if there is some pixel level misalignments and tell you that, right? So the first, so that makes your life easier. But the first thing that you do is you ensure that your CV is formatted cleanly, right? Now, the next part is very important, which is that whenever someone is looking at your CV, right, they're not going to read it, right? I'm sure all of you already know the big number that everyone says that, you need to have, there are 6 seconds that you have in front of your recruiter to do something. So that's why it's very difficult for you to do well there, which is why, you have to be very, very simple and very, very concise, right? So how much you have written really does not matter. How clean it is written, how well organized it is, and most important, how simple it is. So I have seen a lot of people, what they do is that they would mention the name of the product that they owned, or they would mention the name of the um, some complex technology that they owned. Now the problem with that is that if the hiring manager, if the recruiter or anyone is not able to understand what you mean there, right? Let's assume that, there was some internal metric that you were using that's not very common, right? And a lot of people, track efficiency differently, and some people track users differently, and so on and so forth. Let's assume that that's the case. And if you mention that there in the CV, it is going to leave it to chance that the other person may or may not understand, which is why you have to ensure that your CV is absolutely simple and concise, right? Unless it's that, you're not going to do well at it. So the first thing that you have to understand is that your CV needs to be absolutely simple and absolutely concise, right? Concise is still easy. Simple means you need to use very simple, understandable numbers, right? For example, revenue, daily active users, monthly active users, annual revenue rate, monthly revenue rate. Use standard currencies, maybe dollar, or if you're using rupees, then use rupees everywhere. Use lakh or million consistently. Things like churn, renewal, retention, stickiness. Basically, very common terms, very common metrics that are used should be there. So every time you do that on your CV, it's easier and easier for the other person to understand. The next is that it should be well structured. So if you're coming out of college, basically wherever you are in your career, the importance should be like that, right? So of course, the CV should start with a summary. If you're just coming out of college and you don't have any experience, then putting your education at the top is fine. If not, then you put your work experience, then you put then you put your education, and then you put your skills and projects and all of those things if needed. I'll just show you the template as well for you to understand that. So of course, the structure is easy to get. And the last part is what we're going to focus in the second half of this session today, which is that your CV is suitably tailored. Right now, all of us have been told in the past and multiple times the fact that your CV should be tailored to every job description, right? I'm going to tell you in the second half of the today's session is how exactly you can do it, right? Because you can of course have a simple CV, you can have it well structured and all of those things, but then if you've not tailored it, you're again leaving it to chance whether the other person will like your CV or not. Because let's face it, because of the demand of product roles, which means because of the number of people who want to get into product, there is a very high chance that someone who's hiring finds another candidate that has done a very similar experience to what they are hiring for, which is why it's very, very important that it should be suitably tailored. The feeling that we are gunning for, the feeling that we are going for, is the fact that the other person should feel that, oh, this is a very obvious fit. I'm going to talk about what obvious fit means in a while, but that's the most important part of what a great PMCV is. So you have to understand that making a CV is not a one-time process. Making a CV is a continuous process where you start with a base CV, and then every time you want to have a great PMCV, you want to suitably tailor it towards that, right? So that is what a great PMCV looks like, right? Now let's try and go and understand how you will tailor your CV or improve your CV. But before that, I'm just going to show you a structured and clean CV. This has my details and numbers and everything from a while back, but don't worry, I've got fair bit of experience, but we'll talk about how you can do it without that. But essentially a very clean and crisp way of looking at it, right? Which is your name, email, phone number, and LinkedIn. If you've got a portfolio, then great. A portfolio is important when you don't have a lot of experience. It's lesser and lesser important as your experience improves, but projects are still important. We'll talk about that in a bit. A very crisp summary, but as you can see, everything has to be very, very clearly aligned, right? So if this is the space here, it should be the same space here. If this is the space here, it should be the same space here, right? And if you look at it, it's very, very simple, right? It's the number is, what is the revenue, what is the ARR, number of users, onboarding of how many users, efficiency, paid users, CAC, all of these things, right? It's a very simply put CV. And of course, if you have more than 7 years of experience, 2 pages is fine. If you don't have more than 7 years of experience, then you have to keep it to a single page. This template is already available on my LinkedIn. It's a little difficult to manage. I mean, you have to edit it on LaTeX, on Overleaf, but it's pretty, once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy, and it creates a very, very clear work experience very, very cleanly, right? But that's, of course, one part of it, which is how do you tailor your CV and how do you go about that. The next part of the more important is how do you improve the CV, right? Now, like I've already mentioned, the design, colors, photos don't matter. As long as a simple CV is there, it's fine. The biggest part is how do you improve your CV? Now, the philosophy there, or what I have seen work for a lot of people and continuously doing it works, eventually you get more shortlists, is the following. The first thing, you have to make it in your mind very clear that I will always and always tailor the CV. There will be no situation where I will not tailor the CV. I'm going to tailor the CV every time I apply. I will show you how you can make it easy using a tool that we've built, but I will always tailor the CV as long as I don't feel that my current CV itself is very good for this role, which can be a case for a lot of things. The first thing that you have to do after that is you have to understand the job description deeply, right? Which means that first thing that you have to understand is that whatever job description is there, right? So we'll just look at a job description here as well. Just 1 minute. Yeah. So we look at a job description here. So let's assume that this is the job description that we are going for, which is T2C growth and product manager. Now, understanding this very, very deeply, which means what are they saying in this, right? The role leads planning and execution of the app and web tech roadmap to evaluate the DTC consumer experience and drive business growth, blends, blah, 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 user understanding, and so on and so forth. Now, what you will do now, understand what they want here, right? They very clearly mention that they want someone with a strong understanding of D2C digital journeys. They want someone who has done conversion funnels, who's done consumer behavior. They want someone who has had experience working with these teams, right? Done A/B testing, built, launch, and drive that strengthen LTV and D2C scale. So go through each and every word of the JD. I mean, now you don't need to do it. There is AI that can do it for you. I will show a tool that we built that does exactly that. But the first step is to understand what the JD wants. Get a sense of 6 or 7 points that you see that this is what my JD really wants, right? So, as you can see there, they want a lot of fitment with D2C. They want a lot of fitment with experimentation. They want a lot of fitment with working with tech and scaling D2C brands and so on and so forth. Now, it may be possible that you've not done a D2C brand in the past, but you can change your CV to come very close to whatever you've done. Now, there are two ways to do it. One is when you've got experience and one is not. We'll talk about both in the next 2 slides. But understand that after you've gone through the JD, after you've understood exactly what the JD is all about, the next step for you is to say that, okay, now I'm iterating on my CV. And what can I do to match my CV to whatever the person has said? Now, I'm not talking about lying. We should definitely not lie on the CV, but exaggerating is fine. Creating projects that very closely align to what the CV needs is absolutely fine. We'll talk about certain examples as well in terms of what you could do, but it's absolutely fine to do that. So after you've understood the JD, take the insights from there and actually change your CV structurally, which means you essentially gun for a feeling that the other person gets, which is that, oh, this guy is an obvious fit to my requirement, right? Which means that in my mind, I have 3-4 things that I want to look at when I see a CV, when it comes to me. And those 3 or 4 things seem like they're there, or at least a couple of them are there, right? So that is how you essentially work on something like this and make yourself an obvious fit. Now, the biggest part of this is how do you change your CV structurally? So let me help you with that. 1 second. So far, just give me a yes if you've been able to understand and follow whatever we've been doing. Perfect. We see a lot of that's nice. Okay, now let's move further. Now, how do you change your CV for different roles? First, we'll talk about people who've got experience, which means people who've got a good amount of experience to work with, which means that when you've got a decent amount of experience, having projects, just side projects, wouldn't help, right? Because here, if you've got experience, like I mentioned, it isn't really feasible for you to target APM roles, which means that basic tear downs or small updates here and there are not really going to work out, right? Which means that you will have to improve, right? Which means that what you will have to do is you will have to find something within your experience and tailor it towards the closest fit. So for example, what I would say here is, again, this is just an example, but here, of course, one thing is to fill in keywords. So there are some common keywords that I can see: GA4, SQL, Power BI, Tableau. All of these are very easy tools. So don't worry if you think that I don't know these tools, because tools in the modern time, the tools are made so easily that it's very, very easy to pick up these tools, right? But I can see that they're looking at app and website, right? And this is the core growth engine for the D2C business, which means that I work on traffic, conversion, LTV, and repeat behavior, right? And you act as a bridge between these things, and then build, launch, and drive adoption. So there is a lot of stuff that I can see which is a typical thing. Now my next job is to go to my CV and say that, okay, which experience can I find out of my current experiences where I can integrate something like this? Again, not lie, but where can I integrate something like this? Right now, sometimes it's easy to find, sometimes you have to be a little more creative. But for example, since they're looking at something that is D2C, since they're looking at something that has a lot of experimentations, what can I do in any of my previous roles where something very, very similar can happen? Right? Can I, for example, find a website where, for example, this is something that we launched, right? Now, this was done from scale and it onboarded a lot of users and they were using it. Now, instead of presenting it as a software, or instead of presenting it as completely a product only, can I actually present it as an app slash web where people could come and buy things and so on and so forth, right? So essentially what I'm trying to say is, you be smart about first mapping whatever the recruiter needs, then find how this can align with your current experience, which means that which part of all the experiences that you've had so far is the closest, where you can do, I wouldn't say like force fitting, but where the logic of changing this feels okay. Now, of course, I'm not saying that based on this you can expect, the changes will go from 80 to for 50% to 100%, and every time you'll get shortlisted, but the chances will increase manifold, right? Because what you're trying to do now is you're trying to say that, okay, you require someone who's done experimentation, who's done D2C and all of that. I'm going to now present a product that I built and I'm going to go ahead and showcase that as something very similar to a D2C brand. Now, sometimes what will happen is it is going to be impossible for you to do it, right? There will be no way, or there will be no method by which you can actually correlate your current experience with whatever is needed. There is a lot of difference there. In that case, what you have to do is something that we call as stretch projects. Right now, what are stretch projects? Stretch projects are basically imagining the fact that, let's assume that, like in my experience, there was Byju's, right? So let's assume that Byju's is doing D2C for some reason, right? Now, of course, Byju's is not there anymore or not working well anymore. So this is there, but we can take that example from my background, or we can take another example. Let's say Swiggy is doing some D2C experiments. What would those projects look like? Right? What does it mean? It basically means, how am I finding extended projects within my experience, which actually go ahead and help me add certain stretch projects in the experience section of whatever I have done and closely align it with my existing experience. What it does is, now it, of course, because you're hiring, someone is hiring you with experience, they're not going to look at only projects or something like that. They're going to look at your experience and try to find overlaps there. What you've done is essentially you've given yourself a better chance, because you've now done certain AI projects, and now with AI it's very easy to build them. You can build a working prototype, you can build a quick user research, you can understand, you can do some PRDs and all of that, and you can showcase them as your experience, right? Again, I'm again not saying you shouldn't lie. You can be upfront about it. Of course, when you're giving it in the CV, you don't like prominently mention that this is something that you've done as stretch. You mention it as one of the points that are there in the experience. But again, when you're interviewing or when you're discussing, you can be upfront about the fact that this is a stretch project that you were building, maybe as an additional responsibility at your company. Since you're already working at that company, or you've already worked at that company, you do have some more pull to be able to at least take up something extra on your own, right? If you take something, that's why I'm calling it stretch projects, because these are projects that are a little extra within your experience. So you don't really have to be worried about the fact that you don't have any pull there. Like, for example, if you are working at company A and you're trying to do stretch projects at company B, it doesn't make sense. But if you're working at company A and your stretch projects is also from a company A, it makes your profile much, much better, because now everyone realizes that this could have been, or this may have been, or should have been an additional part of whatever you've been doing so far. Right. Now to quickly look at what do you do when you don't have an experience. Sorry, I think the wrong slide was open, but anyway, you understood what I was saying. When you do it with experience, you basically understand a recruiter's need, you evaluate your experience, you find the experience with closest fit, and you either change the CV or add stretch projects, just like I had mentioned right now. Right now, once you go to the realm of having no experience, here what happens is you will not have the ability to showcase stretch projects because you don't have any experience, you're coming out of college, and so on and so forth. In this case, anyway, you're going to look at APM roles only because you're coming right out of college. Here, building projects is easy, right? Here, just looking at, okay, they're looking at a D2C brand. This is what Plum does, and this is what they work on. Can I do a project that's very close to that? Build a real product, build a full-blown product now with AI, with Lovable, Emergent, Base 44. It's so Claude Code. It's so easy to actually build these projects so that you have a ready-made product that you can bring, but bring this product or this project front and center of whatever you're doing. Right. So with no experience, it's still fairly easy because anyway, if you're just starting your career, you're going to look at this as a uh, project only, and you can do that. When I say experience, even if you don't have PM experience, don't worry about it. Even if your experience has been in sales, don't worry about it. Ask yourself that with this JD in my company, what is something that a D2C brand would do in product in my company? Right? Of course, like I said, sometimes you will not find a existing overlap, but then you always have an opportunity to stretch. You always have an opportunity to say that I took it upon myself to create a stretch project because I wanted to try, or I'm interested in this domain, and so on and so forth. It will take a bit of time, but once you've started working on it, once you've started building these products well, then the rest of the things get aligned very, very fast. Right. Now I'm going to show you, a quick demo of how you could do this on a product that we've built called Atlas. But before that, just let me know if everyone's understood everything and all of those things are good. Yeah, I can see a yes, so it's pretty good. 1 minute. Okay, now let me just open Atlas. So what Atlas does, you can just go to ayuda.co.in/Atlas and then you can check it out. But what Atlas does is I've already uploaded my CV. So when you log in, it's going to ask you to upload your CV. What you could do here is you could add a job. Now you could either paste the URL. So if it's a URL that's coming from an existing non-LinkedIn job portal, we are able to fetch the URL directly, and it's going to be pre-filled here. But in our case, since this was on LinkedIn, I'm just going to look at it from LinkedIn and copy. I'm sorry, I didn't quite. Sorry for that. And I have this entire role. You just have to copy paste it, especially when you're on LinkedIn. Okay, shouldn't change the tabs. What's that? Copy link. Yeah, and here we go. Sorry. And we're going to just add job. Right. Now, what this does is it basically allows you to run a job agent. Now, what this does exactly what I've been just talking about, which is to say that, tailor your CV and generate recommendations based on that. So we'll just see how that works. Right. So this is the first step of what I mentioned, which is truly understand what this wants, right? So core requirements, driving short and long term, partner with tech teams, identify pain points, build and launch LTV, and all of those things. So the first thing that you have to understand is what are the core requirements that this product has, right? Once you've understood it, you then, the product tells you the strengths and weaknesses, what is good, what is not, and so on and so forth. and then changes in this. Now sometimes your existing is going to be enough. So as you can see, instead of saying key product funnels like it was directly impacting D2C scale, in the PLG point it again talked about scale and D2C and all of those kind of things. Then of course what the summary is going to be like, and then some ideas of some projects that I could do. So since the JD saw Google Analytics 4 and A/B testing, it's given me an idea of what I can add in my existing experience that to my CV. So I can do a project where I've done Google Analytics 4 as the A/B testing and done an A/B testing in Vyapar. It's given me another idea of, because it was team and SLAs and all of those things as well in the JD, it's given me an idea of doing a process for bug reporting. It's given me an idea of launching a personalized engine, because that's also something around customer LTV and personalization that was there, and so on. So now I can use these and also maybe select it. So I can select this and say that this is going to get added to my CV. And then, of course, if you need a referral message, it's there as well. But now what it does is it generates your CV. So you can select a project and, it is going to apply your bullet points and everything. And it's going to give you the CV that you're going to use to apply. So once again, every single CV is going to work, and it gives you a lot of boost in terms of what your logic is and so on and so forth. But what it has done is it has added all of these projects in the middle of all of these things, right? It has added these terms of D2C scale. It has added these little tidbits that are very, very important to ensure that now this is very, very closely aligned with whatever was expected. And it's also added certain projects. If you want, you can add these projects within your experience itself. If you want to showcase that, of course, you have to be truthful. So you can showcase it as projects, but since it's showing it within your experience, it's okay to show it at the end here as well. That's also absolutely fine. Either of those things work completely fine. And then you can just download your CV from here and mark it as applied on this product. Right. So that is basically how you can implement everything that we've learned today. Before I open the floor for questions, a little bit about our flagship program as well. Now, the brochure of the program is available on our website. If you haven't seen it, please do check it out. It's a very detailed program. It has learning, interview prep, AI, and all of that supported with one-on-ones, and working on this in terms of understanding how do you build your CV, how do you build your profile, how do you learn the right skills, how do you learn everything around AI. Basically, the most comprehensive program that you could find, just to give you a brief of all the modules that we cover, across 25 to 30 sessions. You can just go on the website and fill up the form, or there is a WhatsApp number there as well. You can just reach out from there and you can use it. And yeah, I wouldn't talk too much about it. I think I've already spoken about it a couple of times. So this is something that you can definitely try. And yeah, and I hope this was really helpful. We will keep doing more of these sessions. So stay tuned for that in the group. And once again, thank you so much for joining. If you can let me know in the chat if this is something that you found useful, keep doing more of that, and it'll be great.